This is clearly still a divided country. So if we're looking at the margins, not just by which President Trump won, and the margins in the swing states, but we're also looking at what the legislative majorities look like in both the House and the Senate. And I'm certainly anticipating that Republicans are going to retain control of the House. We're still looking at very narrow legislative majorities, which suggests one, our country is still polarized. And what it also suggests is that the governing coalition is going to have to maintain discipline in order to be effective. And if they cannot maintain discipline, there are going to be ways for Congress to still be at a standstill. So, you can't just blame it on having the president of one party and having one chamber in Congress being controlled by the other for there to be a legislative stalemate. There's still the possibility for that. It's really going to come down to management, and it's going to come down to the ideas and the policies that are being presented.
Well, as Republicans choose their leaders this week, and I don't think we'll have too many surprises, if any, on the House side, Andra, I wonder what the strategy conversation is today between Hakeem Jeffries, Pete Aguilar, and Catherine Clark. The Democratic leadership in the House remains in the minority. What's their plan?
I think what they may be considering is how much to push back and when to fight their battles. Donald Trump certainly has a mandate. He has a bigger mandate because he won the popular vote, and not just the Electoral College in this election. But again, it's a narrow mandate. And I think what Democrats may decide to do is to stand back and let Republicans govern, and let's see if the ideas actually hold merit, if they can get through Congress and get signed by the president, and also when implemented, if they actually do work for the American people. If they are perceived as being antagonistic or opposing all things, and not just voting against it, which I expect Democrats to do, but vociferously coming out and attacking everything, it might actually take attention away from the merits of the policies themselves. And if these policies prove to not actually be good for the American people, then the Democrats have their talking points. See, we let Republicans reign and govern in an unfettered kind of way, and the policies that they put forward were disastrous for the American people. So I suspect that they're trying to figure out when is the right time to push back, especially if it involves preserving institutions. But when do they allow bad policies to come forward so that the American people can see that those policies might not actually be advantageous towards all American people, and including some of the people who voted for Donald Trump? I think that that's probably the direction in which they're headed.
Well, so as we consider those people who voted for Donald Trump, Andra, obviously nothing is monolithic, but we've spent a lot of time talking about the swing we saw toward him in specific demographic groups, including Latinos, some portion of Black men as well. It is the Republican Party that seems like it is attracting more people into a larger tent, one could argue. I wonder what you make of the fact, though, that kind of wider coalition, more multicultural, multi-ethnic coalition doesn't necessarily seem to be manifesting itself in the same way as Donald Trump selects those who will be closest to him as he actually serves as president. Other than Marco Rubio, the people who have been named so far and those we understand to be on the short list, we're talking about a lot of white people.
Well, if you go back and you look at what his cabinet and cabinet equivalent appointments looked like in his first term, he had Nikki Haley and he had Ben Carson. And then if we look at the number of women, we also saw that compared to the Obama, Bush, Clinton administrations, he had far fewer women in positions of leadership. So you can look at people like Nikki Haley or Kirstjen Nielsen, among others who were able to serve Linda McMahon, in positions of power. He hasn't had time to announce his full cabinet slate, so I'll wait to see what the diversity looks like. Marco Rubio is certainly, if he is in fact the designee to be Secretary of State, is certainly a historic choice. He would be the first Latino in this position. I think that it is certainly remarkable in terms of descriptive representation. Susie Wiles' choice is certainly a descriptively representative choice. I think we need to give him time to see how much more diverse it looks. I don't think I'm holding my breath to see if it's going to match the diversity of the Biden or the Obama or the Clinton administrations or even the Bush administrations. But I think that I'm expecting to see a little bit more descriptive diversity amongst the cabinet level picks.
Professor, Donald Trump's coming to town tomorrow. He's going to meet with Joe Biden in the Oval Office. I suspect the optics will be fascinating. Should Joe Biden remind Donald Trump or the reporters in the room that he was not afforded such an invitation 4 years ago?
I don't know what would be gained by bringing that up. I mean, it's certainly a sign of graciousness. I expect that reporters are going to, and analysts are going to make that particular observation. I think this, might be an opportunity for President Biden to talk about how important it is for democracies to have smooth transitions, for losers to accept their defeat gracefully. And by just demonstrating and modeling that, in some ways, it might be an indictment of how poorly the last transition was.
Well, fair enough, and they have pledged to make this transition go more smoothly this time around. Andra, finally, before we let you go, of course, the way in which Donald Trump views his mandate here is one that could be potentially much more solid and broader, considering he did claim victory in every single swing state that we were watching, including your state of Georgia. And you know Georgia politics incredibly well. And I wonder, as we can cast forward to 4 more years from now, even 2 more years from now in the midterms, if this was decisive or if Georgia is still going to be swingy in the elections moving forward, knowing that the blue wall, for example, didn't look so blue this time around. In fact, it looked very, very red.
Well, I think, Donald Trump certainly has a mandate, but I think that some of his new supporters are conditional supporters, and they want to see that he makes good on his promises, which probably factored more into the impressions of improving the economy and lowering inflation than it did on some of the other tenets of his platform. We can already see his immigration policy taking shape, and I think voters, supporters, and opponents are going to look to see how efficacious his policies are. He might be able to maintain or broaden that base if he does it, if he does a good job. But if he doesn't, he might lose some of those supporters. And as far as Georgia is concerned, I think it's important to keep in mind that Kamala Harris lost the state by a margin of about 2.5 percentage points. That's half the margin by which Hillary Clinton lost in 2020. So while the fundamentals of the state of Georgia still favor Republicans, they're favoring them by slimmer margins. And I think 2024 was kind of evidence of the fact that Georgia is still much more competitive than it was 20 years ago.